Hello everybody, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be starting chapter 3 in our book Between Death and Life, written by Dolores right here. Now, this chapter is about as long as chapter 2, which we were able to finish in one video, but I feel like the context in this particular chapter may be a bit harder to read in a timely manner, so I may be breaking this up into 2 separate videos. So this one is titled A Near-Death Experience. So we're going to be reading about, I think it's 2 or 3 cases, and this is not written in a kind of question and answer format. Not all of my information about the death experience has come from hypnosis. Occasionally, people tell me about near-death experiences, or NDEs, which they have had. This term was made popular by the work of Dr. Raymond Moody and Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, hyphenated. It refers to events people remember when they have literally died and crossed the threshold to the other side and have been brought back to our world of the living by the advances of science. So somebody who died, say, in a hospital and they were medically brought back, maybe somehow saw the light and then they weren't ready and they came back. There are so many stories about this. You can find them on YouTube if you're interested. The stories that people have recounted to me traditionally follow the pattern that other researchers have discovered. They also parallel the information I have found in my work, with the exception that those people have come back to report their experiences, whereas mine remained on the spirit plane until they were reincarnated into their present life. My subjects carry the memory, but it is buried deep within their subconscious and can only be released by the use of regressive hypnosis. The case I will report carries many of the classical portions. A friend introduced me to Meg by saying that she had a remarkable story to tell me. Meg had not confided this experience to very many people because she was afraid of ridicule. I'm so sorry. My cat. I didn't think she was going to do that. Okay. Oh, and now I lost my place. It was too personal and private, and she felt there were many who would never understand the importance she placed upon it. Hold on one second. Okay. She felt it had changed her life forever. Meg was not the same after it, nor would she ever be the same. She believed this was the reason she was allowed to retain the memory. It was a gift she could draw upon in times of indecision and stress. She explained that hypnosis would not be necessary to recover the memory from her subconscious because it had been forever emblazoned in her mind. Meg may have been hazy about some of the details, but she knew she would never forget it, and no one would ever be able to convince her it had not occurred. It was a turning point in her life. Meg was a mature woman in her late 40s, married with several children. She had not read anything about NDEs, and she definitely had not been exposed to my material. She led an active life with many interests, but everything that had happened since the event had hinged upon its importance. It continued to color everything in her life. We met at a friend's house where we could have privacy, and Meg settled into a comfortable chair to relate her story for the tape recorder. I was impressed by her need for accuracy and the careful way she avoided embellishment of any kind. I'm sorry. She felt the need to recite it correctly, and she remembered it in remarkable detail. Meg agreed to allow me to print the story on the condition that I kept her anonymous. This is what occurred in her own words. So now we're going to hear exactly what was taped. And of course, I don't know if her real name is Meg, but that's the name they're using. It happened when I had surgery about 10 years ago in 1978. I was due to open a bookstore in June, but accidentally, in a routine examination, they found a lesion on my lung. They couldn't decide whether it was cancerous or benign, so I had to have lung surgery. I must say that before going in, I intuitively did not feel like I had cancer, and I didn't feel too good about this surgery. I didn't have good vibrations about it. That's the only way I can describe it. I had gone through a rather conventional childhood. I went to several different churches and then no churches at all. They were every type, congregational, Lutheran, etc. When we moved out to the country, I went with my next door neighbor to the Baptist church, but I was not raised with a fundamentalist background. In fact, it was a very loose Christian background, loose in that I wasn't accustomed to going to church an awful lot. When I married my husband, I joined his church, which was an Episcopal church. Again, it was a very loose relationship and remains that today. Somewhere along the line, I'd come to the conclusion that I certainly was at the point of being an agnostic, perhaps even an atheist. But I think because of my childhood habits, I didn't dare quite become a total atheist, just in case. And here she laughs. And notice that you would think that somebody who had an NDE would go to this completely religious side. But there is a difference between being religious and being spiritual. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused and also kind of judgmental. But you'll find that a lot of people that have had NDEs, that have experienced the unexplainable and things that a lot of us could only imagine, they don't choose a religion, but they are very spiritual because they have seen the truth and remember the truth. Whereas we have seen the truth many times between lives, but we don't remember. I want you to know where I was coming from as I lay in the hospital the night before the surgery. I really was convinced I might not come out of this. I said what I would call the darkness. I said what I thought might possibly be my last prayer. Sorry, I missed a line. I whispered into what I would call the darkness. I don't know if you're there, but if you are, this is the best I can do. And I tried to review everything and to see if spiritually I had anything left undone. Then I said, I don't really think you're there, but if you are, I really need some help. I went right to the wall. I'm sorry I can't have more faith, but in all honesty, this is the best in the final analysis that I can do. So anyhow, I came through the surgery fine, but I felt like hell because I hurt. I was hurting so bad, all I could think of was, when was the next shot? I'm putting this all in because I think I have to be honest. I was drifting in and out, and I was being given Demerol. So for the skeptics, they can say, well, she was on painkillers. It doesn't matter. The skeptics are going to say what they're going to say anyway. About the third day in intensive care, I fell asleep, and suddenly I was going down a very long, dark canyon. I felt very, very warm and very, very secure, but it was the blackest canyon I'd ever seen. They were like mountain walls that seemed quite far away, and then suddenly they seemed close. At one point, I looked on these mountain walls, and instead of being all black, they almost appeared orange with dark, flickering lights against them. It had something to do with souls, but I don't remember what it was. But it was a very warm, secure feeling. As I was going down the canyon, I saw a very misty place just ahead of me. And as I came upon it, I could see that there was some kind of a rock barrier blocking the entire entrance to the canyon. You couldn't go on, but there was just enough room to squeeze around it. There was mist everywhere. And then I saw the people standing there. There were two men and another shadowy figure. All of a sudden, I recognized who that person was, and then he was no longer a shadowy figure. This is funny, but he looked like Gene Wilder used to look in Willy Wonka. He had that wonderful curly hair and was wearing a suit with white piping. My first thought was, what is this? And then all of a sudden, I realized I was dying. I did experience a moment of fear there. Then this man in the suit said, "You are at death." Those were the words, "You are at death." Then I realized that he was the angel of death. He didn't say it, but I knew it, and I thought to myself, he was a little intimidating. But when he said, "You are at death," it was so kind that I was not afraid. I was just not afraid at all. He was so kind, and he was so efficient. It was incredible. And I remember pondering it, then nodding my head and saying, "I know." Now I'm going to say all of the rest of this in a jumble because I was getting information simultaneously. It was just coming in from impressions. Where someone said something, I will quote exactly what they said. My first thought was, there really is something after death. There really is. I was absolutely astounded. I kept saying, but death is so easy. It's so easy. It's like getting up out of this chair and sitting down in that chair. These men were nodding their heads, and one of them said, yes, but it is hard to get there. I didn't understand it, but that's what he said. Then the man in the suit said, and you are being given a choice. Now I thought of several things. One thought was, death is a dancer. That's a strange thought, but I'm trying to relate what I got at the time in its purest form. I got the impression at that point that I was not always going to be given a choice. I also got the impression that not everyone was given a choice. That this was just at this particular time, at this point. Then I also got the impression that this angel of death was not this being's permanent position. I felt that he was just on assignment and that he wouldn't always be having this assignment. There were some other shadowy figures there, and I perceived that they were there to help me. Because he said, do you wish to stay or do you wish to go? Now, stay meant stay with them. Go meant go back. It's not what you would normally think. It was the reverse. Do you wish to stay or do you wish to go? And I knew it was wonderful there and I wanted to stay. And she's saying this excitedly. And so I did. And so I said, I want to stay. I can't remember his exact words, but he said, there are some things you have to know before you make up your mind. Then I was shown my mother and she was crying and sobbing. And he said, now your mother will be destroyed, and she, in her destruction, will destroy those around her. And I'm sure he was talking about my father. I perceived that her life would just be over at that point, and in his love for her, his life would be over. But I said, oh, I want to stay, because I perceived that time was so fast there that it was nothing. They would be there so quickly, and they would understand when they got there as well. I also perceived another thing, that whatever way I chose was just right. There was absolutely no judgment or censure, but what I chose to do was the right thing to do for me. Then I was shown my husband. He was crying and he was saying, I never knew I loved her, which fits in with the way the marriage was at the time. I saw it would be very hard on him, but I said, I want to stay, because I knew that in just a little while, everybody would be there and they'd all understand. Then he said, now, your children will be all right, but they will not go as far as they could. But I still said, I want to stay. I knew my children would be all right, maybe not do as well if I was there, maybe not do as well as if I was there, but they'd still not go under. To stay there was still the most attractive choice. And then Death said, now, you will have to stay close to your children. In other words, stay close to the edge. And I was told I would have to guide my children. I was just astonished because that's not what I wanted. I wanted to go on over to this happy place and learn. I don't know how I knew I could learn there. It just came into my mind, and I knew. I hadn't seen it, but I knew the minute these people opened their mouths that this was a place that I wanted to be. I just knew that there were answers there. The answers, I suppose. There were studies, answers, growth. This was just instinctive, but I knew it was a place I wanted to stay. I sure didn't want to leave it and go back to these problems. I wanted to be there. But I reluctantly said at that point, well, if I have to stay close to the edge, I might as well go back. I've got these responsibilities, and I can handle it better from that side than I can by just trying to stay close to my children and influencing. So I said, okay, I'll go. And they all seemed quite pleased that I had decided that, even though there would have been no censure or judgment. I felt as if I was beginning to pull back, and I saw those other minor figures whispering, she's going to go, she's going to go. I can't remember if they disappeared or if they went around the barrier. I think they went around the barrier. And I perceived that they had been there to help me cross over, but they weren't needed, so they disappeared. Then I started to pull back as if I was leaving. And one of these men spoke up and said, "Before you go, there are some things we want you to know." Instantly, I was in another place. I wasn't in the tunnel anymore. It was kind of like a backyard, and there was a circle of people. I've tried since then to guess how many were in that circle of people sitting around in chairs. I would guess maybe 8 or 10 men and women. I perceived that they were my counsel. And I knew that every single person has a counsel that has a responsibility for each soul down here. They sort of reminded me of a country Sunday school group meeting out at the churchyard, maybe in the afternoon or something. I really couldn't see faces, but this one person sort of guided me. I remembered his bare arms and his rolled up white shirt sleeves, very much like men would do at a warm Sunday, summer Bible class type of thing. He took me over to a girl sitting under a tree, and she had black skin, colored skin. And he kind of plucked at her skin. She made the motions of pinching of the skin of her forearm between her thumb and forefinger. And he said, "This is so unimportant, this skin. This is so unimportant. It's just a little covering. It is so unimportant, it's laughable." And then they both kind of laughed, and I was thinking, why is he telling me this? I know that. Then the next picture was, we were standing on a road, and there were at least one of my counselors with me. These 2 young men of East Indian visage were walking up the road, and they were there to show me myself. Now I was standing there, and all of a sudden next to me was myself. I saw a beautiful, very large, brilliant, opaque, shimmering sphere that I knew was myself. And I walked around and I entered myself, this sphere of light. She illustrated with hand motions the act of entering the top of the sphere and proceeding downward through it to come out of the bottom. And I knew that when I came out, I would have all my answers. I would know myself, and I did. But when I went into the sphere, I descended. It was like being bathed in milky white, very comfortable. And I thought, any minute now, I will reach the center. And soon I reached on through and emerged out the other side, sort of at a downward angle. I knew when I was in the center, but the center was exactly like the periphery. In other words, the center was exactly like the edges. Yet I perceived when I was in the edges and going through, and in the center and coming out again. But the center was exactly like the periphery. They were just the same composition. When I came out, I knew myself. And I stood there and I felt embarrassed. I felt naked because I knew myself and I perceived my good and my bad, and I made no judgment upon myself. And I said, I've got to work on that. And they knew me too. They knew me totally. And they smiled and nodded. And the nice thing was that there was no censure, absolutely none, no judgment. This is where I get hazy. I cannot recall which came next. I looked up and the sky was suddenly darkened, and it was filled with stars. Some were huge and some were medium and some were tiny, and they were of varying brilliances, but not one outshone the other. Even if there was a very tiny one next to a huge, brilliant one, you could still see each with equal clarity. And I knew the stars were souls. I said, "Well, where is mine?" And someone said, "There it is." I looked behind me and there was my star. It had just risen off the horizon. And suddenly I was there in the place where my star was. And I felt like I was interwoven into fabric. In that instant, I knew that we were all totally connected and that no matter what happened, we could not be destroyed. Even if something came and ripped the fabric would hold. I knew that I could not be destroyed, nor could anyone else. That I was, as I am. Then I was next back in the meadow, standing at that roadside, and I looked out across this beautiful sunlit meadow, and there was a grove of trees. It was symbolic to me that there was a grove, but I perceived that within it was the tree of life. And suddenly, out of this grove of trees came this enormous ball of lightning. I just watched it as it flew across the meadow, and it struck me right here, and she put her hand on her chest over her heart area. It was as though I had the breath knocked out of me. It was as if every ounce of everything was sucked out of me and I was consumed. And what came into me was total, pure, unconditional love. It was so incredible. It went into every cell and I could hardly get my breath. There wasn't anything I could give except love, because that was all I was composed of. It had taken over every atom, and then I started coming back. And someone shouted to me, and it may have been her counselor from her council that was helping her when she crossed over there for a bit. And they said, "Stay married. You're meant to be married," resignedly, which I have done. I came back and I woke up and I saw the nurse in the intensive care unit leaning over me with the most concerned look on her face. She was watching me and I thought, "Don't worry, I'm all right. I'm not going to die, and I won't go away again." I also thought, "Oh, you don't know where I've been. I didn't tell anyone for quite a few days." Later, we discussed the possibility that Meg was dying and maybe the nurse had either seen something on the machines or in the way she was acting. When Meg was zapped by the ball of lightning, that might have been an actual jolt to the body to restore life. She returned to her body immediately after being jolted. It could have affected her rather like the electric shocks administered to a patient after their heart stops. There will undoubtedly be debate about whether this incident really occurred or whether it was a drug-related fantasy. But Meg has no such argument going on within her. She knows it was real. There is no doubt in her voice as she relates the incident. She knows because it changed her life forever. As Meg said, maybe someone has to almost lose their life in order to find it. And now we have just a little short section titled "The Rest of Meg's Story." Meg became a good friend, and we remained in touch for more than 25 years after she told me this story. The NDE had such a profound effect on her life that she always told her husband that if she was dying, to allow her to go. She didn't want to be brought back. This happens with many people who have experienced this phenomenon. They are no longer afraid of death. They have seen the other side and are anxious to go there again when the time comes. So years later, she developed cancer and was dying in the hospital. When her vital signs stopped, her husband became frantic and asked the medical personnel to resuscitate Meg. It brought her back, but she was very angry. She had once again crossed to the other side and did not want to return. She insisted that it did not happen again. I would feel like if you weren't meant to return, then you just wouldn't return. If we plan how we're going to die, wouldn't that be part of the plan, I would think? As she lay in the hospital, her pain increased and there were no more access to her veins to administer pain medication. Then one night, a young male nurse entered her room and gently inserted an IV with pain medication in a small vein between her ring finger and her little finger. My daughter Julia, who was a nurse for 20 years, said that this is a very unlikely place to insert an IV. Meg was more comfortable for a few days until the IV had to be changed. She insisted that they bring the young male nurse in to replace it because he had done it so beautifully. The doctors insisted that there were no male nurses employed at that hospital. So who was the young man who had so gently relieved her pain? A spirit from the other side? Her guardian angel? Whoever he was definitely not from this physical earth. He had helped to make her passing more comfortable because she died a few days later in her sleep before anyone could bring her back to this world again. I don't grieve for Meg because I know she is happy. She was one of the few who was able to see a glimpse of the other side, even if it was only for a few moments. What she saw was so beautiful, she knew she would have no fear returning. All right. So that was chapter 3. And in the next video, of course, we'll move on to chapter 4. That is titled The Schools, and it is written in a question and answer format or an interview format. This chapter is a bit longer, so we will be breaking this up into probably, I would say, I'm still going here, 3 to 5 videos, maybe. We'll see how far we can get. So yeah, anywhere from 3 to 5 videos with that one. So we'll stop right here. Thank you all so very much who have been joining me and enjoying this book. I really love reading Dolores Cannon's book. If you don't know much about her, you should definitely look into her. She did pass away several years ago. Oddly enough, I think she fell and had a head injury several years ago, but her daughter does have a lot of social media platforms. She goes live pretty often. I think she's carried on her mom's work, and it's quite interesting to see that kind of continue on and see what the differences is between her and her daughter. So I love you all very much. I will see you all again soon for the first part of chapter 4. And until I see you all again, take care of yourself and take care of those around you. Bye-bye.